All right, so crash course here for CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Um, these are super powerful. So, what are they? HTML is designed to specify what content is to be displayed in the browser. Like here's the text, the images, the links, things like that. CSS specifies how that content should be displayed. What's the font? What's the size? What's the color? What's the layout? All of that type of stuff. How does it look different on your phone versus your desktop versus your tablet? All of those questions. CSS, when we do CSS, we write a rule set. And the way a rule set works is it's a series of selectors um, with specific rules associated with them. And so here's an example. This selector is P, meaning for all paragraphs in our HTML document, apply the following rules. Rules are formatted inside of curly brackets. There is a property followed by a colon, followed by the property's value. So what this, and you'll notice this also is just a little bit different than like HTML properties, JSON, and JavaScript. So right now we got four different ways of doing like properties, which gets confusing. Yeah. Um, like if you wanted different formatting for different paragraphs, we would hold that thought for a moment. We do that slightly differently. We don't get to create new tag types. So like there is P, but there isn't like a P123 like there is with headings. The reason why we have like H1, H2, H3, H4, H5 is because you can have different levels of like headings and subheadings in your document, but paragraph is just a paragraph. But we can format different paragraphs in different ways. We'll see how to do that in a moment. So this formats all paragraphs red text. Um, so property value, we call this a declaration um, with our rule set. So there's a very simple rule set. Curly bracket to start it, colon between the property and the property value, semicolon at the end. All of this stuff is important and different from what we've seen with the other things. All right. Let me back up a second here. We can have selectors can refer directly to tags like paragraph, but they can also refer to those classes we saw. Okay, so this, to answer your question, this is how we could do it. We could assign a class property to different class properties to different paragraphs. We could have selectors for those different class properties and apply like different colors or whatever styling we want to do. A given part of a given element in HTML could be targeted by multiple different selectors. Okay, so we could have a selector here for all paragraphs. We could have another selector later that maybe changes the font size just for paragraphs of a certain class. So a given HTML element may be matched and have rules applied from multiple different selectors. And we'll see some examples of that as well. Um, an important part of CSS is what's called the box model. And when you're using, you can right click in Chrome and say inspect element on an HTML page, and you get a nice visualization of the box model for that element, which I think is really, really helpful. Here's an example here where I have some text. All right, so this is like my paragraph element. Their padding is the space between the content and the border, which may or may not be displayed, right? So every, like our paragraph element here has a border. It doesn't mean it has to be visible, but still conceptually it exists. So padding is the space between the border and the content. Margin is the space between the border and the like the whole bounding box, which would be the space between other adjacent elements. Okay, so we can specify the padding for how much space we want around our content in terms of the border, but then we specify the margin separately for how much space we want between adjacent elements. Okay. I think it gets kind of confusing, but when you use inspect element in Chrome, it's not too bad at all. You can like really see it visually, which is awesome. So let's dive into both the box model and the rule set with a little bit more detail, which I think would be super helpful. All right, so let's go back to our index.html file. And we are going to add a reference to the style sheet we want. So up here at the top, between the meta tag and the title tag, we're going to add what's called a link. And we're going to link to our style sheet. And we're going to look at that style sheet in a second. And this link tag has the slash at the end here. There's no content to it. But basically, this says, hey, here's the style sheet for this HTML document. And you'll find it inside the styles folder, and it's called styles.css. So we have to specify in our HTML document where the style sheet is and which style sheet should be applied. Let's look at the style sheet. So several different selectors here. This HTML would apply to anything within the HTML document, which is like everything on our page, right? So by default, everything on our page will be 10 pixels in terms of the font size. There are many ways to specify units of measurement in CSS. I'm using pixels here, which probably isn't the best, but it's, I think, the most intuitive for us to wrap our hands around. I'm saying the font for everything on our HTML page, unless later overridden by another rule, is going to be some sort of like sans serif font, specifically Open Sans. Any content that is tagged by H1 is going to have its font size increased to 60. So by default, everything is 10 pixels, but H1 stuff is going to be 60 pixels, and we're going to center it. Okay, cool. We can apply the same rule set to multiple selectors by separating those selectors by a comma. So this is saying all content that's a paragraph or a list item is going to be font size 16, line height of 2, letter spacing of 1. Okay? So that applies to everything within a P or an LI tag, paragraph and list items. I don't know why I did this. Here's another. Maybe it was intentional. Let's give myself the benefit of the doubt. You can repeat a selector, and that's okay. So I have an HTML selector up here with a rule set. I have another HTML selector down here with an additional rule. Both are applied. So everything is going to be by default 10 pixels, Open Sans font, and the background for the entire page is going to be this color of blue. I love that in VS Code, when we specify a color, we can hover on the little square and actually see it here, which is super cool. Yeah. If I say like down here, it's 12, I believe that because it comes later in the file, it overrides what's up here. Like 95% sure. I'm never 100% sure when it comes to CSS. Um, I hate to admit that CSS is one of those things that I invest enough time in to get the thing I'm immediately trying to do to work. And I've never invested sufficient time in to truly understand how it works in entirety, which I should really do something about one of these days. Body, so this applies to everything within the body tags of our HTML document. We're specifying the width of the entire body. Here's where we're specifying the margin. Trying to remember what zero auto does. I think zero means the left margin is 0 and the rest are determined automatically. So for things like margin and padding, you can specify one value and that's applied to left, right, top, and bottom. Or you can specify 4 values like we do for padding here, and it's specified, I think it's left, right, top, bottom, if I remember the order. but we can always click on the MDN reference. This is my go-to reference. It's the Mozilla Developer Network for anything JavaScript, HTML, CSS. I always rely upon this. Here's our border. I'm adding a border, 5-pixel thick border, solid black color. That's our whole body piece. Oh, here's the background color for the body. We'll see what that looks like. Here's the rule set for H1. Oops. Again, I'm repeating H1. Here I'm focused on colors and shadows. I'm adding a shadow. Here's how I want the image to be displayed. There's different display modes. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. So we'll come back to that. And then here's something we haven't seen before. I have button.demo. Button is the name of the tag. So if we go back to index.html, we had a button tag here. Demo is the class. So by saying button.demo, this rule set is applied only to buttons of class demo. This gets back to the paragraph question. So this is how I can have specific styling just for buttons of class demo. Color, border, background color, padding, text align, display, all sorts of stuff. So now what you'll notice is if you right click on index.html and open it in the live server, I'm going to open it up in Chrome because I want to show you some Chrome stuff. That doesn't look very good. Huh. Why isn't mine formatted? Yours looks formatted. Thank you. All right, let's try that again. So much better. Looks totally different, right? So this is the same content with simply a different style sheet. All right, we got all sorts of stuff going on here, which looks differently. So here's the cool thing. And this is only going to, so on these computers, unlike your Chromebooks, you can use Chrome without being signed into your district Chrome account. And for all the stuff we're doing like the rest of the year, you're going to want to do that, right? Because if you go to Chrome and you can choose like guest, I think will work, or just no profile or whatever you want, then you'll be able to do this next important step, which is right clicking on the page and saying inspect. This lets you see your page source and all of your elements, which is like huge. So for example, here is, I can highlight on different things and inspect those elements, which is super cool. Here's the visualization of the margin, the border, the padding. See how it's highlighting it? Here's the inner part of the body. So it's showing me all of that, which is super neat. Don't need this. So I can see all of those things like in terms of the styles. Oops. I can open up the code up here and I can drill into different elements. As I highlight the code, it highlights the corresponding part of the HTML document, which is really neat as you're trying to like figure things out, right? The other thing that's pretty cool is if I click here on this paragraph for at Mozilla, we're a global community of, I can see all the rule sets that are being applied. I can see that this paragraph rule set is applied. I can see that this one is applied, and as well as this part of the HTML. I can see that the font size has a strike through because it's been overridden by a more specific rule related to the paragraph. Okay. I can also see how if I unselect things, I can turn rules on and off interactively. Or maybe if I'm not quite sure like what font size I want, I can change this right here in Chrome and type new values and try it out interactively until I find the one I want. And then I can go back and update my CSS. So Chrome's inspect element and all of these tools are super, super, super useful for playing around with our styling and web pages. which I think is huge, 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 huge. So big fan of those tools.